Hello everyone. Today we will be continuing our discussion of weighted voting with the concept of Banzhaf power. Now, when we are dealing with weighted voting systems, as we saw in the last video, the actual voting power of each individual voter, or player as we say, is not necessarily proportional to the number of votes that that player has. For instance, if a unanimous vote is required, all of the players in the voting system effectively have the same voting power, even though they may all have different weights. So one way that we can sort of measure the voting power of different players in a weighted voting system is with the Banzhaf power index. So what this basically is sort of centered around is the idea of coalitions. Now, what a coalition is basically is just any set of players within a weighted voting system that are voting together in a certain way. Now, when we're dealing with coalitions, we can have either a winning coalition, which is a coalition that has enough votes in order to win or be able to pass the motion effectively. And we have a losing coalition, which is one that does not have enough votes to get a motion to pass. Now, we'll have this example right here that we'll look at for this concept. So we have the weighted voting system where we have a total of V equals 20. And our quota is 15, so we need a 3/4 majority in order for a motion to pass. Now, one thing about this system is you will notice there are no dictators in this, meaning that none of our players have more than the quota, or more votes than the quota. So this is kind of an important feature when we're dealing with Banzhaf power, because the idea is that if we do not have any dictators, we only really need to concern ourselves with coalitions that have 2 or more players, because a 1-player coalition is never going to be a winning coalition unless there's a dictator. So I've listed out right here all of the different coalitions that are possible with 2 or more players. One notable instance is this last one, where we have all 4 players in the coalition. We call this the Grand Coalition. Basically, it's just the coalition that includes all of the players in a weighted voting system. Now, how do we make this list? Well, whenever I'm making a list like this, I like to start with the 2-player coalitions first. And what I do basically is I take every possible pair of players that we can get, starting with 1 and 2, and then we go down the line. So 1 and 2, we have then 1 and 3, then 1 and 4. Then we go to the next player, player 2. We have 2, 3, 2, 4, and then finally 3, 4. 3-player coalitions, I kind of like to think of this as if we have a 4-player voting system, weighted voting system, these are all basically just the Grand Coalition with 1 player left out. So leave out 4, leave out 3, leave out 2, leave out 1. So once we've figured out all of these, our list of coalitions with 2 or more players, we need to figure out which ones of these are winning coalitions. So what we're going to do is basically we're going to figure out how many votes each of these coalitions has and figure out if it's at least equal to the quota, basically. So we'll start with this first one, P1, P2. We have 10 plus 6, that's 16 votes. So this is a winning coalition because we're more than our quota. 1 and 3, 13 votes, not a winning coalition. 1 and 4, 11, also not a winning coalition. 2, 3, 9 votes. 2, 4, 7, 3, 4, 4. So of the 2-player coalitions, the only one of these that's a winning coalition is this first one, 1 and 2. All right, now we can move on to the 3-player coalitions. So this first one, P1 plus P2 plus P3, that's 19 votes total, so this is a winning coalition. 1, 2, and 4, we have 17. This is also a winning coalition. 1, 3, and 4, 14, not a winning coalition because we're less than our quota of 15. And then finally, 2, 3, and 4, that's 10 votes, also not a winning coalition. And then finally, the grand coalition is going to be all 4 of our players, that's 20 votes. The grand coalition is always going to be a winning coalition because, of course, we have all of the votes in our system included in the grand coalition. So at this point, we're going to just take all of our winning coalitions that we just figured out, and we're going to list them all out. So we have 1 and 2. So P1, P2. Over here we've got 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 4. And then finally, we have the grand coalition, 1, 2, 3, 4. All right. The next step deals with the concept of what we call critical players. Now, what a critical player is, basically, that's just a player that if we were to remove it from that coalition, it would no longer be a winning coalition. So let's look at this first one, P1 and P2. We have 16 votes total. Our quota is 15, and we have 10 votes for P1, 6 votes for P2. If we get rid of P1, we now only have 6 votes from P2, so it's no longer a winning coalition. If we get rid of P2, we lose 6 votes. We're now down to just 10 from P1, also no longer a winning coalition. So this would mean that both P1 and P2 are critical players. So we're going to underline P1 and P2 to indicate that both of those are critical players in this coalition. Next we have P1, P2, and P3. So this coalition has 19 votes total. In this case, if we get rid of P3, we still have 16 votes. So P3 is not a critical player in this case, because if we get rid of P3, we still have enough votes for the motion to pass. However, if we get rid of P1 or P2, either one of those will drop us down to not enough votes, basically less than 15 votes. So P1 and P2 are still critical players in this coalition, P3 is not. Finally, we have 1, 2, 4, or sorry, next we have 1, 2, 4. In this case, we have 17 total votes. Similarly to the last one, if we get rid of P4, we still have 16 votes, enough for the motion to pass. If we get rid of P2, we're down to 11, not enough. If we get rid of P1, we're down to 7, also not enough. So P1 and P2 are still critical players, P4 is not. And then finally, we have the grand coalition with 20 votes total. If we get rid of P1, then we have only 10 votes remaining, not enough to pass. So P1 is a critical player. If we get rid of P2, we have only 14. So again, not enough for the motion to pass. Therefore, P2 is also a critical player. If we get rid of 3 or 4, we still have more than 15 votes, so neither of those are critical players. So now, what we're going to do is we're going to determine how many times each of these players is a critical player. This is what we call the critical count. And the Banzhaf power index is basically centered around the idea that it's the critical count of a player that measures their true voting power, not their actual weight. So we use the symbol B to indicate the critical count for a player. So we'll write this as B1 through B4, critical count for all these players. So P1, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 times that P1 is a critical player. So that would be a critical count of 4. Same thing for P2. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 times that P2 is a critical player. B3 and B4 are both going to be 0 because P3 and P4, both in all of the coalitions that they're in, are not critical players. All right. Now we figure out what the total critical count is. The total critical count we indicate as T, and this is basically just B1 plus B2 plus B3 plus B4, which if we add all of these up, that gives us 8. So now we get to actually calculating the Banzhaf power index for all of our players. All the Banzhaf power index is that player's critical count divided by the total critical count. So we use the Greek letter beta to indicate Banzhaf power. So we'll have beta 1, beta 2, beta 3, and beta 4. So we would use B1 over T to calculate the first player's Banzhaf power. So this would be 4 over 8. And we can express this as either a fraction or a decimal or a percentage. So this would mean the Banzhaf power index, or as we can abbreviate it, BPI, is 50% for our first player. Second player also has a critical count of 4, so it's going to be the exact same. Also 50%. Players 3 and 4 both have critical counts of 0. So their Banzhaf power both are going to be 0 over 8 or 0%. So what this basically tells us is in this weighted voting system, even though we have very different weights for all 4 players, effectively players 1 and 2 have the same actual voting power, 50% for each of them, versus players 3 and 4 effectively have 0 voting power. We would call players 3 and 4 dummy players in this case. They're basically just players that have no real voting power. Thank you for watching, and as always, if you have questions, I'm happy to help.